welcome once again to Sid Caudle, Christian People's Alliance. Sid, we're going to be concentrating on somewhat different items today. One is Mass Resistance, which is an organisation over the pond there in America, run by a good mate of mine. And he's decided that he's got to fight against things like DEI and woke, and especially as it affects children. And both sides of the pond, wow, does it affect children? And the US Supreme Court at last overturned the dreadful gay marriage ruling that took, it was way back in the 2015, I think this first came in, because one or two of the states in America, because America's run very differently from the UK, are starting challenging this. Idaho has reared its head, and the Supreme Court has overturned the decision. Now that's brilliant, because another state in America, Colorado, has also done the same thing. Sid, why has the conservative media and the conservative part of the country in America and Britain kowtowed to LGBT, to the liberal progressives, and they've actually normalized behavior which is not normal?
Yes, you see, it's quite interesting because even though we now have some right-wing media in this country with GB News, we had it previously with Daily Mail, but they were very isolated. It's not Christian media, and there is a difference between the right-wing media and the Christian media. And what I've found when I've tried to get onto this media is that they're coming against Ofcom, and which is the regulator. Now, I don't know exactly what's going on in the United States, but I would guess it's something very similar. So the regulator is putting a lot of pressure on GB News as to what they're allowed to say and what they're allowed to do, as indeed they do on Christian television, because we know with Revelation TV, they've been under a lot of pressure from Ofcom as well as to what they're allowed to say and do on their programme. And it's quite interesting because there isn't the same pressure at all from people on the left, because people on the left can go on television and promote Hamas and promote, banned organisations, and Ofcom doesn't say a word. But if these organisations bring on Christians to speak out, and they speak out against homosexuality, for instance, or against transsexualism and such like, then Ofcom goes berserk and threatens to take away their license and goodness knows what. That is what is behind the problem with the media.
Same with the states. We look at Marcus Rubio, that's the US Secretary of State, and I'm going to read you what he said in the last few days. Europe is toast. Well, that's a familiar saying from America, isn't it, at the present time? But you might be right in some respects. Its countries are, for the most part, governed by socialists, that's Europe in general, who soon will be replaced by Muslims, already well along in progress. They've shown their true colours by refusing even landing and overflight rights to US warplanes. Meanwhile, we bear the entire brunt of dealing with a radical and apocalyptic Iranian regime who has closed off the oils. This is a one-way street and it's time to get out. You agree with that?
I can understand where he's coming from. And to be honest with you, there are a lot of left-wing governments in Europe, but they're not entirely left-wing. I mean, Spain and France and the UK obviously have left-wing governments. And those left-wing governments are undoubtedly strongly influenced by Islam, simply because Muslims are very good at organizing themselves, and they absolutely block vote for whoever will support them. And it happens all over the world. And also, they don't mind fiddling elections because they don't actually believe in democracy. So if they can cheat in any way they possibly can, they will do. And because of that, the left-wing parties tend to be working very hard to keep the Muslims on board. And incidentally, by the way, in the United Kingdom, the Labour Party have largely lost the Muslims because they weren't, as far as they were concerned, they supported Israel over Gaza. The Greens haven't, the Lib Dems haven't, and of course there's the Independents. And in these local elections that are coming up, I believe the Labour Party is going to do very badly because they'll largely be deserted by the Muslims. But the Labour Party are trying desperately hard to bring the Muslims back on board, and that's a massive problem. But I think I'm very disappointed with, particularly with Italy, Meloni, and also with Germany, because they haven't got left-wing governments. And they should have the guts to say, okay, you're opposing what's going on in Iran, but we're not. We're supporting it. But they don't seem to. They seem to just be going along with what the European Union is saying, going along with the majority. And that, to me, is very disappointing. I mean, I'm disappointed with Starmer as well, the way that he's stopped the United States using British bases at the beginning of the war. I mean, I think that was a terrible decision, frankly. But he also, for his own reasons, has decided he wants to go along with the decisions of the EU. I mean, he doesn't have to, but that's what he's doing.
Yeah, and at the moment, there's lots of problems in the capital city of the UK, London. We're moving on to discuss the Barclay Group, who's one of the big builders in, I think, number 3 in the country. And they've given up with London. It's impossible to make any money. It will spread to other regions as well. But there are that many laws and restrictions now, they can't make money and build houses. Somebody comes along called Big Yellow Storage, which is a way of storing things, obviously, and they can buy up land without any restrictions, without being curtailed in doing what they want, and they can just stick people's containers in them. Now, there's a lot going on here because there's so much come out of, and it's not been thought through again, the Grenfell tragedy. Of course, this is cladding on the building, but it's gone over the top. The lengths you have to go to and the type of cladding and the remediation work, etc., etc. The other thing that's well over the top and has changed radically in the last 15 years is that when you build an estate, in the past, the council have been obliged to put a school, GP surgery, goodness knows what, as infrastructure. Now the builders have to do it. Well, you can't keep putting, as all governments have done in recent years, everything on private enterprise. Anything to get out of paying at council level. Oh, we can't afford it. Well, you could. You just adjust where you spend your money at council level. But it's all right criticising these big builders for profiteering, but there's no profits here.
I disagree with you there because, having sat on a planning committee for a council, I think requiring a developer to, as part of a planning permission, to put in doctors' surgeries and new roads and whatever else is required, because they are going to make money out of the development and they can charge whatever they like for the houses which they're developing. So there's absolutely right that the cost of the roads and the cost of the infrastructure, including surgeries and maybe shops as well, should be included in the cost of the development. I think that's absolutely the right thing for the council to do. And obviously, the council will then be responsible for maintaining things. I mean, the developer's going to build them, but the council will have to maintain them. But it's foolish, frankly, for a council just to grant planning permission and not bring into the planning permission the cost of the infrastructure.
What's done in most countries, maybe we can learn from other nations, is that if you're building anything, you're responsible for the infrastructure. And in Spain, certainly, they get you to build all the roads, the street lighting, goodness knows what, before that. And that is sensible. UK don't. They just say, well, we want the big stuff from you. But it's the state's responsibility to get out and pay for education, to pay for medical work. Everybody seems to be getting private industry to pay for everything, and there's only so much money to go around.
But it's at the end of the day, if I mean we're talking about large scale developments here. I mean we're not talking about 20 houses. I mean, if someone's building 20 houses, they're not going to be expected to put in a school and a doctor's surgery and goodness knows what else. But if someone's building 200 houses as part of a development, then absolutely, as part of that development, there needs to be a school and there needs to be a surgery and there needs to be some shops. It's all going to be part of the development, and the developers should price that into the cost of development. You have to understand that, if a developer is building 200 houses, on probably what's happening, it's happening here in Hitchin, unfortunately, on a meadow. I mean, for a start, they're probably not paying the farmer that much for the land. I mean, on which they're building. They're then going to make enormous amount of money from these houses that they're building. If you're building 200 houses, you're probably going to make somewhere in the region of 30,000 per house. And when you think how that adds up, then to actually say to the developer, okay, you've got to price into the cost of these houses, a school, a doctor's surgery, and some shops, and the cost of the roads, both in the development and also round the development to connect up the infrastructure. That's all got to be priced into your development. That's fair enough. It's good. It's very good practice for the council. In fact, if the council doesn't do it, they're fools, frankly.
Well, there you go. Two different points of view there. I suppose the key thing here is London, where everything is twice the price of everywhere else. That's why Barclays have pulled out. Rachel Reeves is now deciding that net zero perhaps is not as good as they thought it was. Hooray! She's banned new licenses together with the rest of the cabinet, exploration of the North Sea in general. But I've done a deep dive on this, and I've found the following: that if you go into the various websites that contain facts and figures, then you do an AI on it, you find out that Rachel Reeves has done a nuanced pivot. Hang on. No, it's not a nuanced pivot. It's a screeching U-turn. And so have the rest of the cabinet. Now, that worries me about Labour's whole dealings with this, but it worries me about AI as well. And I urge everybody to do their own investigations, which AI they're looking at. Certainly GPT is well in Guardian territory, and Gemini, which until now has been the best, is coming up with these nebulous phrases to try and hide what is really going on. So beware of that. But let's look at the North Sea. Let's look at the fact that it is a screeching U-turn, but hooray, well done, certain U-turns need doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a great credit to Kemi Badenoch because she pushed Keir Starmer very hard at Prime Minister's Question Time, and also in the media after Prime Minister's Question Time. She kept pushing, 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 and Keir Starmer said, "Oh, it's not my decision. It's the decision of Ed Miliband. It's nothing to do with me," which frankly was complete nonsense. The Prime Minister says, "I can't make a decision. It's only the Energy Secretary has to make that decision without any reference to me or any reference to Cabinet." I mean, what a ridiculous statement to make. And when Kemi Badenoch came back to him and said, "You're the Prime Minister. You can make decisions," he put his head in his hands. It's like, oh, how dare you not accept my excuse? But then Rachel Reeves comes along and says, we've got to drill in the North Sea. We need to do it. The decision not to do any drilling in the North Sea is mad. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, so Rachel Reeves can be involved in the decision, even though Keir Starmer can't. So the Labour Party have got themselves into a complete mess. But it's a fantastic credit to Kemi Badenoch that she's pushed them, and apparently she's pushed them to make another U-turn. And well done, Kemi Badenoch, for focusing on that issue and pushing hard.
Right, we move on to Reform UK. Had a pledge initially to get rid of the triple lock pension. They've done a U-turn now. And I frankly said, wondered what all the fuss about is the triple lock. In essence, if you boil it down, of course, there's this thing, it will go up with the rate of inflation or the average wage growth or 2.5%. But really, if you encapsulate those three things, it's cost of living. They're not going to give anything away. They're just going to go with cost of living. But it's been kicked up and down the field and, oh, you can't have this, it's going to cost too much. Well, no, it's keeping up with the cost of living. You're actually paying out no more than you should.
Well, okay, so what's going on here is that this was introduced as a way, almost a way of buying votes, because it's not just the cost of living, because your pension goes up by either the rate of inflation or the average growth in earnings or 2.5% minimum. So if inflation is 3%, but the average growth in earnings is 4.5%, which is what's happened this year, you actually get a rise, pensioners get a rise, which is 1.5% higher than the cost of living. So that is what a lot of financial organisations have said in the long term is unaffordable. Now, what's happened with reform is that Nigel Farage, who is basically seems to be making policy a little bit on the hoof, says, "Oh, I don't think it's affordable. We're going to have to get rid of the triple lock." But then Robert Jenrick comes in and says, "Wait a minute, this is incredibly popular. We're going to lose enormous number of votes from pensioners. There's no advantage whatsoever for us to say we're going to get rid of the triple lock. So we've got to change policy. We've got to say we'll keep it because we're going to lose too many votes. It's ridiculous." So all of a sudden they've done a screeching U-turn and said, yes, we'll keep it. But they've also got to examine where they're getting the money from. And somebody in church, funnily enough, to me yesterday said, Reform is adopting your financial policies because I've had a look. What they're saying is now basically what you're saying in your manifesto. So it looks as though Reform has suddenly woken up and realised, wait a minute, we can save 50 billion from cutting quangos. If we save the 50 billion from cutting quangos, we can afford the triple lock and we can afford to cut taxes. And also we can save money by cutting the civil service. And we can also save money by getting rid of Stonewall and lots of woke schemes. We can remove social requirements from government contracts. We can save, that's what the CPA is saying, we need to be saying the same thing. And if you say these things, then the triple lock becomes easily affordable. And basically, I think that's exactly what's happened. Reform have picked up our policies and run with them and realised that, yeah, we don't have to say we'll get rid of the triple lock.
Other side of the Atlantic, I'm going to read another statement coming out of the White House, akin to what we said at the beginning of the programme. While basking in the protection offered by America's military capability, this is referring to Europe, so they can fund their bulging, barely functioning welfare programs and taking advantage of America's powerful economy with preferential tariffs in their favour. When asked for support, they don't give it to us.
Yes, what's happening with tariffs is that the United States has had a massive trade deficit with almost every country in the world. I mean, certainly with Mexico, with Canada, with European Union, with China. And if you have big trade deficits long term, that they're very harmful to your economy because they have to be made up somehow. And in Trump in coming in with tariffs is basically balancing the situation back. And incidentally, the UK has always had a very big trade deficit with the European Union, up to the tune of something like 90 billion pounds. And what we should have done when we left the European Union is imposed tariffs on the European Union and brought balance back to our trade with the European Union. Instead of that, we decided that we'd do a deal with them, which basically just locked in their advantage. And since Starmer's come in, he said, we're not locking in enough advantage. We've got to give them more advantage than we're giving now. I mean, it's just ridiculous, frankly. But what Trump is doing is absolutely right for the UK economy. And that's why, even though economists have said, oh, tariffs are terrible for trade, it's going to bring world recession and so on and so forth, it's not actually been bad for the United States at all. It has. We do seem to have very low growth worldwide, but the United States has got the highest growth of any country in the world, of the major economies, as the G7 economies.
Yeah, true. Got a question for you. Why do middle class elites, if there's such an animal, want Iran to win the war? Why is there such hatred towards Trump, whatever he does?
Well, my answer to that is that I think it's anti-Christian sentiment. Because when you think about it, what have Muslims and communists or left-wing socialists got in common? The only thing they've got in common is a hatred of Christianity. I mean, if most of their other policies, I mean, they don't have economic policies in common. Most Muslim countries are actually very much committed to capitalism and making money, and they're very good at making money. And they're not sort of, oh, everything has to be run by the state. That's not their position, and they're certainly not on the social policies and homosexuality and transsexualism, all this sort of thing. Muslims don't agree with communists at all. So what they've got in common is a hatred of Christianity. And that's why they hate Trump, because Trump is very strongly in favor of Christianity and has been promoting it and basically saying, I celebrate all the Christian festivals and, I want Christians to find their voice in politics and find their voice in the country and so on and so forth. That is what is really behind their hatred of Trump.
Interesting. Back to Nigel Farage for a second and what we've said about the triple lock. Maybe it's been good that Robert Jenrick has formed part of the party now, because this has come from him. Going back to local authority and where they get their money from and where it goes, an enormous amount goes on pensions. And Nigel's come out and said, oh, we got to do something now about new civil servant pension schemes. They're not going to be gold-plated like the present pension schemes. That's what's really costing the average payer of local rates. Now, is that true or not?
Well, the thing about the local government pension scheme and the civil service pension scheme, so they're not funded. So what actually happens is that when you retire from local government or you retire from the civil service, you receive a pension out of the wages of current civil servants and current local government employees. And that is at the core, the nub of the problem. And frankly, what they need to do is to start maybe curbing the scheme, but setting up funds. Peter Lilly did try and do it, by the way, when he was the pensions minister towards the end of the John Major government. And he basically, it was part of the Conservative manifesto in 1997 that if they got re-elected, they would start to fund all the pension schemes. But of course, they didn't get elected. Blair came in with a landslide, and that was soon forgotten about. It is very much a long-term policy because in the short term, there's nothing much to gain from it. But in the long term, there's an enormous amount to gain from it. So, yeah, absolutely, they should start to fund these schemes. And it may mean that while you're funding them, then there has to be a curb in benefits. I think that, but alternatively, they should just move from a defined benefit scheme to a defined contribution scheme, which is what's happened in almost the entire private sector. And if people don't understand what I'm talking about, a defined benefit scheme basically is a 60th or an 80th of your final salary, which you get in pension. So it's a defined benefit that you get. Defined contribution is you just pay so much into the fund and you get a pension of however much is in the fund when you retire. And frankly, that is generally far more affordable because it's much more predictable. The defined benefit scheme, you really have no idea how much it's going to cost you in the end of the day.
Right, with longevity getting longer, there is common sense in that. Let's have a bit lighter relief. Um, Lots of chapels, especially in Wales and in England, are being converted into all sorts of things, usually in the centre of the village, into housing, which is signs of the time, I suppose. In England alone, there are 10,000 country churches, fantastic architecture and heritage. And I'm going to ask you a question, Sid. What are your favourite churches? Think back over those years. Depends on the denomination, I suppose. The Anglicans perhaps have the majority of beautiful churches.
Well, I have to admit that I'm not. You see, for me, church is not about the buildings. Church is about the presence of God in a place, wherever that place is. And the church I go to now is in a warehouse, and they're now saying it's not big enough. I mean, yesterday the church was absolutely packed to the rafters. There wasn't a spare seat in the building, and we're talking about at least 750 people. They even brought in extra chairs in order to help seat more people and moved all the chairs closer together and the rows closer together to try and get more people into the building. And they're now saying we've got to expand. Well, because it's in a warehouse, you should be able to expand without any great problem. If it was in some sort of ancient building, the idea of, expanding becomes very difficult. I mean, I was earlier, I mean, some years back, I was part of a traditional Anglican church that did do a church extension project. And the church extension project was very expensive because it all had to be in natural stone and so on and so forth. I mean, they produced, afterwards, a very beautiful extension, a very beautiful new church. But I'd far rather, frankly, just have churches in warehouses that are functional, that can easily be adapted and expanded, than just preserve beautiful buildings. I'm not interested in beautiful buildings, frankly. I'm interested in the presence of God.
Well, Sid, somebody's going to accuse you of being a vandal. Would you let the churches just go to rack and ruin and pull them down?
Well, from an historical point of view, I mean, the state has got some interest in preserving the history, but that's not my interest. My interest is the presence of God. And, I don't really care. I mean, you see, we've got a situation now where we've got an Archbishop of Canterbury who, frankly, I mean, has got very little interest in Christianity. So are we going to be preserving Anglican buildings, which they're not preaching the gospel in those buildings. They're just going through the motions. And I mean, this Archbishop of Canterbury is all in favour of same-sex marriage. Well, they've introduced same-sex marriage in the Methodist Church. They're closing buildings left, right, and centre in the Methodist Church. It's like, because, you know, unless a church is focused on God, what's the point of the church? I mean, I remember Roland Baker, who's, Heidi Baker's husband, said on one occasion, if God doesn't show up in the church, why should I? And that's my feeling, I want God in the church. I don't want to just be in church and going through the motions. I want to meet with God. And you can meet with God without being in a wonderful ancient building.
A lot of comfort is been gained in years past with having the locks not put on a country church, and people can going on some of them still and get a real feeling of peace and a nearness to God.
Yeah, absolutely. But you can also get a feeling of peace and nearness of God in a home. I mean, there's another church which I used to go to that's now meeting in different people's homes. And I visited some people who said, yeah, we have church in our home, which we have a group of about 15, 20 people come here every Sunday. And, we have worship, and so on and so forth, and yeah, it's, and we've even been round in our home, been round using anointing oil and praying over the rooms and so on and so forth. In every home you can have the presence of God, and that's what it should be. The presence of God should be everywhere, not just, oh, I've got to go to church to get the presence of God. No, we live in the presence of God.
There you go. Different perspective. We're coming to another one. West Streeting. Well, to quote Wes, the BMA must get real. Many NHS workers are never paid as much as 1 day for a doctor. Oh, now that's from the Labour side. Even they're getting fed up with the greedy BMA.
Well, yeah, I think frankly that this Labour government came into power and decided that they would just pay off everybody that was on strike without any conditions attached, which seemed foolish, frankly. I mean, because there's nothing wrong in giving people higher pay, but it's obviously sensible in a negotiation to say, okay, you're going to get higher pay, so what are you going to give us in return for it? We want more flexible working hours, or we want you to be willing to take on board some artificial intelligence in the system to reduce the administration. This is what we need to do because we've got to make our administration more efficient. And we'll give you higher pay if you're willing to accept, a streamlined administration. I mean, that's what the negotiation that should be going on. But instead of doing that negotiation, the Labour Party just said, "Yeah, we'll give you whatever you want. We've got to stop these strikes." But now the doctors have come back and said, we want even more pay. It's like, wait a minute, we've already given you everything you asked for. What do you mean you want even more pay? And unsurprisingly, they're not best pleased. And yeah, I think this is what does tend to happen with some unions is that they're never satisfied. They always want more, whatever you give them. And what the Labour Party have got to do now is negotiate something in return, as I say, so that at the end of the day, they give them more money, but they have more efficiency in the system, so it basically pays for itself. That's what they've got to do.
Well, there's a lot of people in our country, in the United Kingdom, that are getting fed up with trite phrases. We had them pre-election. The Tories have been in power 14 years. That must have been said thousands of times. They're still saying it, Sid, about the carnage they've caused Labour in the last 20 months. They're still blaming the Tories, and people are frankly getting fed up of it. Does nobody tutor these people before they come for a television interview? You can bet your bottom dollar that 99% of people, oh, it's the last government that was to blame.
Well, the first thing I would say is that this idea that there was 14 years of disaster under the Conservatives is simply not true. I mean, they inherited a very difficult situation in 2010 with very high debt, 140, very high deficit, 140 billion per year. Now, I say deficit because deficit is the rate at which debt is increasing. I mean, we've got a very high long-standing debt, but you can't just solve that problem. What you can do is to reduce the rate at which debt is increasing. And the Labour Party left it at a very high level. Over the years up to COVID, up to 2019, they got it right down from 140 billion per year to 38 billion per year. That was a success. And they did it by cutting revenue spending, but maintaining capital spending. and also in some places even cutting taxes, which brings growth. And what they actually averaged a growth in that time, despite cutting the deficit, they averaged an increase in growth of 2% per year over those 9 years. Now, I say up to COVID because obviously when COVID struck in 2020, that threw everything out of kilter. And you can't judge a government basically on what happens when you have the massive disease that we had with COVID, because obviously that destroyed everything. But you've got to look and see whether the policies were right over the first 9 years when they were in power. And they were right policies, they were effective policies. Now, what should happen if you greatly increase borrowing? You will get growth because you're putting a lot of money into the system. When you're reducing borrowing, because you're taking money out of the system, you'd expect to get less growth. But because they cut revenue spending but maintain capital spending and cut taxes, they managed to do the right things for the economy that brought growth despite cutting debt. Now, obviously, when COVID came along, everything went out of kilter, growth went down, we borrowed a whole lot of extra money, etc. Still, by 2024, even though the deficit had risen enormously during COVID, they got it back to 54 billion. So it was still much lower than it was when they came into power in 2010. The Labour Party have let it rip again, and we're now up to 154 billion. So they've let it rip enormously over the last 2 years, the deficit. And really, they've been absolutely reckless. So the first thing I would say is this idea that we had 14 years of disaster under the Conservatives, which the Labour kept saying over and over again, was simply untrue. Simply untrue. And they didn't want to talk about the deficit, by the way. In the last general election, they never mentioned the deficit, because if they had talked about the deficit, it was very much against their interest to talk about it. And what Rishi Sunak said during the general election campaign is if you vote Labour, then your taxes are going to go up because they're going to spend and tax. And that's exactly what's happened, what he predicted. So I think you're totally right. We didn't have 14 years of disaster. We had 9 years that were very good government, followed by COVID and a very difficult situation indeed, but which they actually handled pretty well given the situation. And the situation now, by the way, in the UK economy is we have recovered way better than Germany from COVID, and we're virtually on a par with the rest of Europe. The idea that it was leaving the EU that caused the problems, and if only we hadn't left the EU, we'd have had a much higher growth. Well, you tell that to the Germans. They've actually got 4% worse growth than us since COVID.
Yeah, Labour again have decided to modernise everything. Computers will solve the NHS, we're told several months ago now. Rubbish. Now they're going to revolutionise the benefit system. They've at least recognised that we do have somewhat of a problem. So the computers will solve this problem, say the government. And they've actually, behind the scenes, said they are going to announce the New Deal very shortly. But I'll tell you what the New Deal is. They've done a trial run in part of the country whereby you are allowed yourself to apply for benefits online. And guess what? 30% more people are applying for benefits. Oh dear, fell at the first. And 7% more are actually receiving more benefits, mostly because of mental health. So if that's your trial run, for goodness sake, what on earth are you going to do when you put the thing in full running mode? It's going to be a disaster.
Yeah, I mean, we can't say no to looking at new working practices, but when you bring in new working practices, you've got to be very careful how you do it. I mean, it wasn't that many years ago when everyone was going to the post office to pick up their pension by cash. And obviously that was hopelessly inefficient. and it had to stop, and everyone now gets their pension credited to their bank account, which is how it ought to operate. And so, you have to have change, and you have to pay benefits in the most economic way possible. But what tends to happen, of course, is every time you have a change, the civil service get hold of it and then try and wreck it to make it somehow so that instead of saving money, you actually spend more money. That's what happens every time. Every time they bring in a change, the civil service do it in such a way that they spend more money through the change. So actually, there's no benefit. And that, I'm afraid, I think is what's going on here. Instead of actually bringing in a mechanized change that will save money, they brought it in such a way that people can claim what they want, and the change is actually detrimental. So it's the minister needs to get to grips with what the civil service are doing and make sure that any change they bring in works and produces savings.
Right. A bit of a light relief, maybe. It apparently is evident that Michael Gove has got the hots about Sabana Mahmood. He quite fancies her. Now, dear old Michael's had a bit of a mixed playing field with marriages and liaisons and ladies in general over the years. And this is a bit of a bizarre statement, isn't it? It's not only cross race, it's cross politics. And there he is as editor in chief of The Spectator. But, it's often been said that people that can't manage their own lives shouldn't be managing everybody else's lives in government.
Well, I don't like this at all. I mean, when I saw this report, I thought that's just blatantly ridiculous, frankly. And I don't like Michael Gove as a person. I've never warmed to him. I find him the sort of person that will wheel and deal and behind the scenes and very Machiavellian, and frankly, I think government is better off without him. But when just suddenly talk is frankly is awful, and he needs to learn to control his emotions and keep his thoughts to himself because they have no benefit to anyone, frankly.
Okay, we must give him some cred points for his education. A bit with the Tories, he didn't make a bad job of that, but really at the moment, as you say, it's bad management, let's call it. Coming to the end, Sid, but I've got to ask for your comments on crippling Britain, because that's what this oil crisis is going to do. We've seen nothing yet. All we've seen is petrol prices and some home heating, but that's nothing to where this is going to go when the consumer price index flies over the roof with supermarkets charging the real prices and the consequences when the farmers have to pay 3 and 4 times as much for fertilizers. There's so many spin-offs on this, Sid. We are not capable in our present financial state to tolerate what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, farming is extremely important, and for some reason, the left wing have really had it in for farmers, and I don't really understand why they've got it in for farmers in the way they have. The only thing I can possibly think is that they want to bring in factory-made food rather than naturally grown food. And if they bring in factory grown food, then they can put into it whatever they like and control the population through it. So that's why naturally grown food could be an enemy of controlling the population. That's the only reason I can think why they want to attack farmers.
Well, we've got to finish off with some sports, Sid. Well, a couple of things. My old club, Manchester United, and this sums up the Premiership. And I think something's got to be done. They have got players they've either got too old or they've fallen out with, goodness knows. There's 5 that they want to get rid of straight away. Casemiro, who's a super player. and been good for the club. Rashford, I won't comment on that. Sancho, neither that. Hoyland, and of course, dear old Onana. When you look at what they paid, never mind transfer fees, Sid, I'm just talking about wages. That lot, 5 of them, £62 million a year Manchester United are going to save. Let's hope they apply it to somewhere decent. But it's got out of hand. It is stupid the amount of money these players are being paid in the Premiership.
No, I agree with you totally. In fact, when you started talking about it, I thought the only reason they're getting rid of these people is their wages. And yeah, I mean, the wages are just too high. And that's why it's when it comes to the end of the contract, I say we can't afford to renew their contract because what they've actually put in is not enough for the amount of which we're paying them, even though they might be putting a lot in. So yeah, I mean, it is ridiculous. And by the way, I was talking to a Man United supporter as to the tremendous change that's happened under Michael Carrick from what was going on before with Amorim, and he said all Michael Carrick's done is just change the system. He said he's got a system in that actually that the players can work with and play with, and they enjoy playing with. Amorim was trying to introduce a system which they couldn't play with and they couldn't work with, and that's why they didn't get the results. It's quite interesting, isn't it? It's you're paying a manager enormous amounts of money, and he's not working effectively with the players with the team he's got, and bringing in loads of new players that are very, very expensive. Unless you've got a system that works, then you're wasting your money.
Indeed, you are. Finally, said we're going to talk about women's sport. Some people are saying, "Oh, it's going to be strong." They're doing things. Back to Manchester United for a second. We've mentioned about Greenwood affair, and they're still kicking off about that this week, and saying they will not tolerate anything to do with the man, prejudging it. Police don't seem to bother, but the women's football team do. And they've gone and not only do they want to captivate us on the football field and the rugby field, I cannot think of anything worse than rugby and ladies. That's a personal point of view, but there you go. But women's sport in general. Channel 4 have taken over the boat race, and boy, has it backfired. Probably not Channel 4's fault. I had Claire Balding, who is excellent at commentating on practically anything. Then the cocks from the Oxford boat race came in and started effing and jeffing. Such was her state of excitement that the commentators had to liberally, quite a few times during the whole programme, apologise for the language. Now, it's bad enough hearing it from men, but when the ladies start, not very edifying, is it?
Well, I don't like bad language, full stop. And interestingly enough, I was watching a program last night on Formula One, which was a good program, but the language was terrible. And it really, I detest bad language, full stop. I don't. If I hear bad language on public transport, I'll literally just tell the people, I'm sorry, I can't sit here listening to your bad language. I'm going to have to move. I just move and sit somewhere else.
Are you listening, Mr. Trump?
Well, yeah.
Okay, on that note of thought for the day, we'll finish. Thanks so much, Sid.
Thank you.